Hello, Namaskar. You're watching Firstpost, and this is Vantage with me, Palki Sharma. We haven't discussed Canada in a while. So tonight we're leading with it, with a story that is not technically new, it's more of the same. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau appeasing Khalistanis for his political gains. This time at a Baisakhi celebration, we'll tell you what happened and how Trudeau reacted. Meanwhile, India is struggling to overcome its China addiction. Imports have doubled in the last 15 years. We'll bring you the numbers and discuss why they pose a risk. In Saudi Arabia, America's top diplomat is talking ceasefire and more. In Europe, a new report raises concerns over press freedom. About time. We look at the findings. An exclusive interview with India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi on election controversies and more. College protests over the Gaza war have spread from the US to Europe with more than 900 arrests. A heat wave has hit parts of Asia, leaving students at the receiving end. In Nigeria, a major infra project is making headlines. What is a vampire facial? How can it lead to HIV? And are people falling out of love with dating apps? We'll bring you the numbers and look at what they say. The headlines first. China, Xi Jinping to visit France, Serbia and Hungary. The trip aims to boost ties between Beijing and Europe. Also on the agenda is the war in Ukraine. This is the Chinese leader's first visit to Europe since the pandemic in 2019. In India, JDS leader Prajwal Revanna booked in a sexual abuse scandal. He is accused of blackmailing hundreds of women using their explicit videos. Revanna is the grandson of India's former Prime Minister H.D. Devegowda. His party, the JDS, is in alliance with the BJP in the state of Karnataka. Revanna is said to have left the country for Germany. Scottish First Minister Hamza Yousaf resigns. He was due to face 2 confidence votes this week. The resignation comes just after a year in power. Yousaf was the first top Scottish leader of Pakistani origin. Istanbul Mayor Ekrem İmamoğlu calls Hamas a terror group. Turkish opposition leader says the October 7th attack was a terrorist attack. His comments are in sharp contrast to President Erdogan's position. Turkey has long provided financial and logistical support to Hamas. And AstraZeneca admits that its vaccine has rare side effects. It comes after the pharma giant faces a class action lawsuit in the UK. In the court documents, it says its vaccine may lead to a rare blood clotting condition. The vaccine was administered in India under the name Covishield. Tonight, we start with Trudeau land, sometimes called Canada. This Sunday was a big deal there. Thousands of Canadian Sikhs gathered in Toronto. They celebrated Vaisakhi or Khalsa Day. It marks the beginning of the Sikh New Year. Now, Vaisakhi was on the 13th of April, but this rally was organized only yesterday. We saw massive parades, a lot of prayers, a lot of food, and a lot of politicians. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau made an appearance, so did opposition leader Pierre Poilievre. Notice the slogans as Trudeau took the stage. This was supposed to be a religious event, an event to showcase the Sikh culture. Instead, it became a political rally. Khalistani separatists chanted slogans non-stop. They shouted Khalistan Zindabaad, basically the creation of an independent Sikh state, which indirectly calls for India's breakup. And look at Trudeau's reaction. He smiles, as if some teenagers are shouting the lyrics of a Taylor Swift song. Trudeau then took the mic. He talked about protecting Sikhs from hate. He also promised more security for Gurdwaras.
Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh. Happy Vaisakhi, Joyeux Vaisakhi. To the nearly 800,000 Canadians of Sikh heritage across this country, we will always be there to protect your rights and your freedoms, and we will always defend your community against hatred and discrimination.
Trudeau also got a gift, a ceremonial sword from the organizers, and as he received it, more chants filled the air. Again, pro-Khalistan slogans. Up next was the leader of Canada's opposition, Pierre Poilievre. His entry also triggered the same reaction. Take a look at this.
Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh.
They all aced the line. India has condemned this event. It has also summoned Canada's Deputy High Commissioner in New Delhi. The government says Canada is giving space to extremism. Now, a couple of things to note here. One, the power of the Sikh community is quite obvious. There are close to 800,000 Sikhs in Canada, 8 lakh. And the country's top leaders are lining up to woo them, so the political power is huge. And two, the Khalistan problem is also obvious. Most Canadian Sikhs may not agree with this ideology, but it's getting a lot of patronage, especially from Justin Trudeau. Just think about it. You're the Prime Minister of a democracy. You get on stage. You hear secessionist slogans against a fellow democracy. What would you do? Shut them down if you can. If not, at least criticize later on social media. But Justin Trudeau did none of that. He probably thinks it's all freedom of expression. Now compare this to Australia. They too hosted Baisakhi events this month. Prime Minister Anthony Albanese attended one of them. No Khalistan slogans there, no secession calls, just a celebration of Sikh culture. Why can't Canada do the same? Because of politics. In Canada, Khalistanis make a lot of noise. They claim to represent all Sikhs. One example of that is Jagmeet Singh. He is a coalition partner of Trudeau and a bona fide Khalistani. Without him, Trudeau's government will fall. So the Prime Minister plays along. India has repeatedly warned Canada against this, to not platform Khalistani separatists. And what does Trudeau do? The exact opposite. He attends an event where people shout Khalistan Zindabaad. It's a very risky strategic move. Trudeau's relations with India are already on life support. First, he allowed Khalistani referendums in Canada. Then he accused India of assassinating a designated Khalistani terrorist, Hardeep Singh Nijjar. And now this, which makes you wonder, where does it stop? Just look at recent opinion polls. Around 43% Canadians plan to vote for the Conservative Party, which is the opposition, 43%. Around 24% prefer Trudeau's Liberal Party. And 19% want Jagmeet Singh. So if elections are held today, Justin Trudeau would lose. His party would be voted out of power in Canada. Is that why he's accommodating the Khalistan movement? To woo the Sikh vote bank, to keep his alliance with Jagmeet Singh? If so, it's a bad bet for Canada. India is poised to become the third largest economy in the world. Western countries are lining up to sign trade deals with India, but Canada is missing out, all because of Trudeau's attitude. His government has been wrong about India once. In January, Canada decided to investigate the Indian government. For what? Election meddling. Canada said, or thought, India tried to influence its general elections. But this month, New Delhi got a clean chit. The investigators said India did not try to meddle. So I guess Canada was wrong all along. This Khalistan threat is more of the same. India has repeatedly told Canada why it's a problem. Creating a Khalistan in India is impossible. The movement has virtually no supporters here. So when the India project fails, what will these Khalistanis do? They'll do what any terror group does. They will turn inward. Let's hope it never comes to that. But if it does, these pictures will haunt Canada. Pictures of their Prime Minister brushing shoulders with violent separatists. A country like India faces all kinds of threats and challenges. Some are visible, like the Khalistanis, but many others are covert. They hide in plain sight until they become too big to ignore or overcome, like India's dependence on China for goods. Despite tensions at the border, India is importing Chinese goods in increasing numbers. Look at the trade deficit first. It has grown dramatically in the last 5 years and crossed $387 billion. The biggest chunk of imports is industrial goods, stuff like your telecom gear, machinery and electronics. 15 years ago, China's share was 21%. Meaning 21% of industrial goods imported by India came from China, 21%, 15 years ago. Today, it's around 30%. So the dependence has increased. So has the pace of Chinese imports. Compared to other countries, India's imports from China are rising 2.3 times faster. So not only are we purchasing more from China, the volume of imports is also expanding, and that too rather quickly. So India remains addicted to Chinese imports, and like any addiction, this one is proving hard to break. There are a couple of reasons for that. First of all, the lack of alternatives. That is a big reason. Take a look at this list. These are India's leading imports, where China has the biggest share. The first is electronics. More than 43% of them, 43% of electronics come from China. Same with machinery. Almost 40% of the machines used in India come from China, which includes sophisticated technology like integrated circuits. In 2022, India bought circuits from China worth over $4 billion. Why this dependence? Because we lack the know-how to make sophisticated equipment and parts. China, on the other hand, has a large number of such factories, also a large pool of patents to access from. Chinese factories contribute over 28% of the world's manufacturing output. So in 2022, they received almost 800,000 patents. China offers both size and scale to importers. It can produce a large number of goods and at a high speed, which makes Chinese suppliers harder to replace. That's one factor, one problem. The second factor is cost. Let's take the example of APIs. That's active pharmaceutical ingredients, API. They're the raw materials used to make drugs, your medicines. India relies heavily on China to supply these APIs. They come from China. Why this dependence? Because China's API supplies are cheap. Take paracetamol, for instance, one of the most commonly used medicines. It is used to treat fever. What is the price of paracetamol in India? Around $4 per kilo. And how much is China selling it for? Around $3.3 to $3.5 for 1 kilo. What makes the Indian supply expensive? Raw material costs, the cost of electricity and labor, and logistics. All of these add to the price, and compared to India, China is far more cost effective on all these three fronts. But it's not all gloomy. This is beginning to change. During the pandemic, India tried to break China's monopoly on the API supply. India introduced production-linked incentives. And the effort has seen some success. Earlier, India imported 80% of its APIs from China. Now that figure has come down to 68%. But there's still a long way to go. If India wants to reduce its dependence on China, it must build up its own manufacturing capacities, and it must do so fast. The border situation has left us little choice. A few days ago, Beijing offered this piece of advice to New Delhi.
A healthy and stable relationship between China and India serves the common interests of both sides. It is conducive to peace and development in the region and the world. The border issue is not the entirety of the China-India relations, and it should be properly managed in an appropriate place with a bilateral relationship.
Forget about the border. Let's do more trade together. That's what China wants from India. But India should not give in, because the trade deficit only favors the Chinese. As long as the numbers are one-sided, this will be a vulnerability for India, something that Beijing can exploit. Just imagine this. China decides to restrict pharma supplies to India. It limits the export of pharma raw materials to India. This will hit India's medical supplies. And we need to be prepared for such scenarios to mitigate these risks. On to West Asia now, where America's top diplomat is visiting. That's US Secretary of State Antony Blinken. He's in Saudi Arabia today. The trip includes two more stops, Jordan and Israel. This is Blinken's 7th visit to West Asia since the war in Gaza began. But this one is being called the crisis tour. Why is that? Because there's a lot on his plate. In Riyadh, he met the Saudi foreign minister. They discussed the war in Gaza. But there's something else that dominated the conversation too, and that is a Saudi-Israel normalization deal. It was all the rage back in September. Israel lobbied for it, America vouched for it, and even the Saudi crown prince was in favor. What is normalization? Basically, Saudi Arabia recognizing Israel. They were talking about it last year, but then came October 7th. Hamas attacked Israel. Israel hit back in Gaza, and normalization went out of the window. Even without the war, it would have been a tall order. Because Saudi Arabia is home to Islam's two holiest sites, they have never recognized Israel. They've always rallied for Palestine. So this would have been far more than the Abraham Accords, the Saudi recognition. It would have meant much more. And Riyadh had bigger demands, like US security guarantees. They also wanted assistance with a civilian nuclear program. But now the price has gone up. Now Saudi Arabia wants more. It wants the recognition of Palestine. They want an independent Palestinian state. And that's what Blinken is there for, to discuss how to achieve the impossible.
I think, look, the work that Saudi Arabia and the United States have been doing together in terms of our own agreements, I think is potentially very close to completion. But then, in order to move forward with normalization, two things will be required: calm in Gaza and a credible pathway to a Palestinian state. So, to the extent we finish our work between us, then I think what's been a hypothetical or a theoretical question suddenly becomes real, and people will have to make decisions.
Blinken had two more engagements, a meeting with Gulf nations and then the World Economic Forum. Both in Riyadh, both focusing on the Gaza war. There was a firm push for a ceasefire, and Blinken put the onus on Hamas. Listen in.
Hamas has before it a proposal that is extraordinarily generous on the part of Israel. And in this moment, the only thing standing between the people of Gaza and a ceasefire is Hamas. They have to decide, and they have to decide quickly. So we're looking to that, and I'm hopeful that they will make the right decision.
The deal includes two things: a 40-day-long ceasefire and the release of Palestinian prisoners in exchange of Israeli hostages. So will Hamas accept this peace deal? We don't know yet. Talks are taking place in Egypt. Qatar is mediating. A Hamas delegation will arrive today. This is their last chance to stop the Rafah offensive. Rafah, as you would know, is a city in southern Gaza where 1.5 million people are seeking refuge. That's more than half of Gaza's population in one city. Israel wanted to raid this city. The US was not on board. The Israeli Prime Minister remained adamant until he got a phone call this weekend. Joe Biden called Benjamin Netanyahu, and he seems to have prevailed. The Israelis are now reconsidering the Rafah offensive. Reports say they will listen to American concerns before launching the attacks. And it makes sense for Netanyahu. He has lost support of international allies. He's also lost support of domestic voters who've been protesting against him. And now he may face an arrest warrant from the International Criminal Court, the ICC. It's apparently preparing arrest warrants against the top Israeli leadership, including Prime Minister Netanyahu. At this point, it's not confirmed, but Netanyahu is already on the defensive. He posted this on social media. Let me quote from what he said. "Under my leadership, Israel will never accept any attempt by the ICC to undermine its inherent right of self-defense." So things not looking so good for him. Plus, he is under pressure from his coalition partners. There's a bunch of far-right parties that help him remain in power. They have a coalition government in Israel, and these far-right parties, leaders, they want the Prime Minister to reject a peace deal. They want him to go into Rafah and destroy Hamas. Meanwhile, the people of Israel want him out, their Prime Minister. They say the return of hostages takes precedence over the Rafah offensive. So it's a truly unique situation for Netanyahu. Should he listen to his cabinet members and anger Washington? Should he listen to the people and risk the stability of his government? He's stuck between the devil and the deep blue sea. Let's turn to Europe now, where press freedom is under threat. You don't hear that every day, but it's true. A German organization has flagged this issue. They worked with 27 rights groups in 19 European countries. And what did they find? Let me quote from the report. "Media freedom and pluralism still stand perilously close to the breaking point in many EU countries and must be almost fully resuscitated in some." That's a damning assessment. It says press freedom is at breaking point in Europe Talk about a role reversal. The EU has spent years lecturing others on media freedom. I guess they forgot their own issues. But what are these issues? This report highlights a number of them. One of them is ownership. A big chunk of publications is owned by a handful of people. This is the case in Croatia, France, Hungary, and Poland. Another issue is censorship, especially in publicly owned media. In Hungary, the state broadcaster is completely under government control. There are similar fears in Croatia and Italy. A third issue is that of the safety of journalists. Physical attacks were reported in multiple countries like Croatia, France, Germany, and Greece. Some journalists were also spied upon. Such cases were reported in Germany, Greece, and Poland. They were victims of foreign spyware like Pegasus and Predator. Finally, we have trust issues. Do Europeans trust their media agencies and publications? Turns out not really. In Slovakia, public trust in media is 27%. In Greece, it's just 19%. In the Czech Republic, 30%. In France, 37%. And in Hungary, 25%. So in these countries, trust is quite low, but others are slightly better off. Like in Germany, around 65% trust the news media. In Estonia, around 59% do. So the big takeaway is this: European media does have problems, whether it's government meddling, censorship, or trust deficit. And what is Brussels doing about it? Well, last year they passed a new law. It's called the Media Freedom Act. The idea is to protect media agencies and journalists, and a few provisions do stand out, like transparency in ownership, making sure people know who owns what. Another provision is fair division of state advertising. You see, government ads make a big chunk of media income everywhere in the world. So the idea is to split them fairly, to make sure that all media groups get these government ads. And finally, protecting the work of journalists. Things like guarding your source or legal protection against snooping. All of these may sound like basic things, but it's important to put them in writing. The question is, will this actually solve the problem? It's not a guarantee. Any law depends on its implementation. If the governments are serious about it, then yes, the situation could improve. But in this case, governments are part of the problem. There are two kinds of leaders in Europe. One who try to control the media, and the other who think that their media is perfect. And both types are problematic. Just look at French President Macron. He considers himself to be a champion of the free press. He's raised the issue in other countries, like Turkey. But at home, his record is not that good. French journalists say Macron has curtailed press freedom. Dozens of them have been arrested and attacked on the job. Another example is Germany. Their Chancellor Olaf Scholz met Azerbaijan's president last week. And what did they discuss? Again, press freedom. Scholz said Azerbaijan has room for improvement. Well, so does Germany. Let me tell you what happened last year. German prosecutors wiretapped journalists. That's right. Their target was a climate activist group called Last Generation, and Berlin thought that this group was dabbling in criminal activities. So what did they do? They tapped phone calls between journalists and activists. And don't get us wrong, Europe is not a dangerous place for journalists. It's not like China or West Asia. But it's not perfect either. Yet they go around criticizing other countries, including India. You may ask, why don't these countries do the same? Sort of like a tit for tat. Because every country operates differently. You don't see India or Brazil talking about press freedom in Europe. They can if they want to, but that's not their style. And Europe needs to understand this. They must fix their own house before lecturing others. Maybe start with this report. It's got 45 pages of problems and suggestions. Clearly, it's a good place to start. Now on to the elections in India. The first two phases of voting are done. 5 more phases remain. Ahead of the third phase, Prime Minister Narendra Modi has spoken to Network 18. He answered questions on the Congress manifesto, the issue of reservation, the controversy over inheritance tax, the use of central agencies to intimidate opposition, why opposition leaders are making a beeline for the BJP, and much more. Here are some excerpts from the conversation.
कांग्रेस का जहाँ तक मैनिफेस्टो है, कोई मुझे बताए क्या चुनाव के अंदर पॉलिटिकल पार्टियों के मैनिफेस्टो ये कोई शोपीस के लिए होते हैं क्या? सचमुच में तो मीडिया का काम है कि हर एक पॉलिटिकल पार्टी के मैनिफेस्टो की बारीकी से जांच पड़ताल करे। मैं इंतजार कर रहा था कि मीडिया करे। पहले दिन मैंने एक कमेंट तो कर दिया था
जी,
मैं कोई आज कर नहीं रहा
जी,
कि भाई मुझे मैनिफेस्टो देख करके लगता है कि इस पर पूरी तरह मुस्लिम लीग की छाप है। तो मुझे लगा कि मीडिया चौंक जाएगा, जो एनालिसिस करने वाले चौंक जाएंगे, लेकिन पता नहीं अब उनकी व्यस्तता कुछ और है। मैनिफेस्टो में उनकी तरफ से जो परोसा गया उतना ही गुड़ी गुड़ी उछालते रहे। फिर मुझे लगता भी ये तो इकोसिस्टम का बड़ा मिलीबग लगता है। अब मुझे सच्चाई लेकर जाना पड़ेगा। मैंने काफी 10 दिन इंतजार किया कि देश इस मैनिफेस्टो में जो बुराइयां हैं उसको कोई न कोई, क्योंकि निष्पक्ष तरीके से आता है तो अच्छा है। आखिरकार मुझे मजबूरन ये सच्चाइयां लेकर के आनी पड़ी। जबकि हिंदुस्तान का संविधान जब बना तब तो कोई आरएसएस वाले, बीजेपी वाले संविधान सभा में नहीं थे। बाबा साहब आम्बेडकर जैसे लोग बैठे थे, पंडित नेहरू जैसे बैठे थे, सरदार वल्लभ भाई बैठे थे, देश के कई महापुरुष बैठे थे। उन सब ने लंबे चिंतन के बाद तय किया था कि भारत जैसे देश में धर्म के आधार पर आरक्षण नहीं दिया जा सकता। 2024 के चुनाव में आप देख रहे हैं उनका मैनिफेस्टो, और मैंने कहा इस पर पूरी तरह मुस्लिम लीग की छाप है, यानी मुस्लिम लीगी नीतियां उन्होंने अपना शुरू किया। अब ये जो उन्होंने स्थितियां बनाई हैं, मुझे बताइए कि देश के लोगों को ये जिस प्रकार से संविधान की धज्जियां उड़ा रहे हैं, जिस प्रकार से लोग बाबा साहब आम्बेडकर को अपमानित करते हैं, एससी एसटी के आरक्षण पर भी खतरा, तलवार लटका देते हैं, ओबीसी का तो जीना मुश्किल कर देंगे। क्या मुझे देश की जनता को प्रशिक्षित करना चाहिए कि नहीं करना चाहिए? मैं सभी जो भी विद्वान लोग हैं, जो कलम के धनी हैं, जो निष्पक्ष हैं, उनका ये दायित्व बनता है कि ऐसे समय देश को वो एजुकेट करें, सही चीजें बताएं। ईवीएम का जवाब तो देश की सुप्रीम कोर्ट ने दे दिया है, और 2014 में इनके पास ईडी थी, इनके पास सीबीआई थी, तो हार क्यों गए भाई? मेरे होम मिनिस्टर तक को जेल में डाल दिया था, तो हार क्यों तो गए वो? अगर ईडी सीबीआई से चुनाव जीते जाते तो ईडी सीबीआई का काम तो इतने सालों तक कांग्रेस ने किया है, वो जीत जाते हैं जी। और इतना बड़ा देश, एक म्युनिसिपैलिटी का चुनाव फिक्स नहीं कर सकते हो भाई, जरा करके देखो। ये संभव होता है क्या फिक्सिंग? क्या दुनिया को मूर्ख बना। लेकिन दुख इस बात का है कि ऐसी बातें करने वालों को आप मीडिया के लोग उनको पूछने के बजाय हमको पूछते हो। एक भी केस ड्रॉप नहीं किया गया है। जो अदालत कहेगी वही होगा, हम कोई निर्णय नहीं लेंगे, स्वतंत्र है। दूसरी बात है, पॉलिटिकल लीडरशिप के केस कितने हैं भाई? ओनली 3%। 97% अच्छे ब्यूरोक्रेट जेल में है। आखिर के संस्था का जन्म क्यों हुआ है भाई? अगर इन संस्थाओं का जन्म इसी काम के लिए हो तो काम नहीं करेगी क्या? और अदालत इतनी बड़ी है जी, किसी को जमानत नहीं दे रही है अदालत, तो अदालत देखती होगी ना भाई। और भ्रष्टाचार के मामले में हम कम से कम उसको लाइट न ले जी। सचमुच में देश में चर्चा होनी चाहिए कि पहला एक जमाना ऐसा था तो आरोप लगता था ना तो भी हिल जाते थे। आज गुनाह सिद्ध हो चुका, सजा हो चुकी, फिर भी आप हाथ ऊंचा कर करके फोटो निकलवा रहे हो। आप भ्रष्टाचार का महिमा मंडन कर रहे हो। इस देश में ये आलोचना का विषय होना चाहिए। भ्रष्टाचार को न्यू नॉर्मल के रूप में ट्रीट नहीं करना चाहिए, वरना इस देश का बहुत नुकसान होगा जी। ये सवाल बीजेपी और अदर्स का वाला नहीं है, देश के लिए ठीक नहीं है कि आप इसको न्यू नॉर्मल बना दें।
It's the season of graduations in the US, a time of hope and cheer. But not this year. This year, US colleges have turned into battlegrounds. Thousands of students are out protesting. They want Israel to stop its war in Gaza. They're telling their colleges, cut all relations with Israel. First, let me pull up the map and show you all the top colleges in the US. But right now, they are all protest sites. Yale, Harvard, Berkeley, NYU, all of them have been affected. In some colleges, in-person classes have been suspended. Elsewhere, the cops have been called in. More than 900 students have been arrested so far. Take a look. Two changes to note here. First of all, the protests are spreading abroad. They began at Columbia University in New York, they spread across America, and now they've reached Europe. Let me show you the scenes in Paris. Students occupied the entrance to Sciences Po. It's one of the top colleges in France. They also had a tense standoff with riot cops. And today another college joined in, Sorbonne University in Paris. They unveiled a massive Palestinian flag outside their campus. Take a look at this.
Ce matin, les étudiants de Saint-Étienne ont aussi bloqué leur université pour l'arrêt des livres de demain, le cessez-le-feu immédiat. En ce moment même, les étudiants d'INALCO mènent une action et vont aller à Gros Moulin pour discuter avec les étudiants de Gros Moulin pour mener une action. Il y a une action à Paris 8 aussi en même temps. Nous ne sommes pas isolés.
So the protest is spreading. Chances are more colleges and students will join, which brings us to the second big change. More violence. Until now, the protests were one-sided. Most of the rallies supported Palestine and Gaza, but that is slowly changing. There are reports of anti-Semitic chants at these rallies, even calls for a Jewish genocide. So Jewish and pro-Israel students are now turning out. They are organizing counter-rallies. And you can see where this is going. Two young, politically charged groups of protesters. It wasn't long before tempers flared. One push or one shove, that's all it takes. And these protests could turn into a violent brawl. A lot of students could also get hurt, which is why calm heads need to prevail. The White House is worried about the situation. They've called for peace and non-violence. But these are passionate students. They don't want restraint. They want over-the-top action. So where do things go from here? Such college protests are not new in the US. In the 1960s, you had the civil rights movement, and students played a key role. In February 1960, black teenagers entered a whites-only establishment. They refused to leave. Pretty soon, thousands of students joined in. The protest spread to 50 US cities. The same thing happened during the Vietnam War. Again, it began with Columbia. Students occupied the university building in 1968. The cops had to forcibly remove them. Most of these protests remained peaceful, but a few did cross the red line. At that time, most colleges had an ROTC, a Reserve Officers Training Corps. ROTC, the idea was to recruit students into the US military. But in the late 1960s, these ROTCs became a target. At Berkeley, its van was torched. At Maryland, the building was occupied, and at Washington University, the whole ROTC building was burnt. So there was a lot of violence and destruction. The deadliest episode unfolded at Kent University. Around 1,000 students were protesting against the Vietnam War, so the National Guard was called in. They shot and killed 4 students. Of course, this triggered more protests. Students at more than 450 colleges took out rallies. Compared to those, the current ones are baby protests, smaller in scale and violence. They resemble the protests of the 1980s, you could say. Students took aim at South Africa's apartheid regime then. Their demands were quite similar. Divest from South Africa. Colleges must divest from South Africa, that's what students said, and cut all links to the apartheid regime. Around 155 colleges ended up doing it. And by 1986, the US government joined in. They placed sanctions and divested from South Africa. So could there be a repeat this time? Well, that looks highly unlikely. For starters, Israel is not South Africa. It's a key part of US policy in West Asia. So divestment or boycott is out of the question. The students would be better off seeking more reasonable things, like a ceasefire in Gaza or more humanitarian aid for the Palestinians. Secondly, the protests are extreme. Opposing Israel is fine, but when it becomes anti-Semitism, it's a problem. We've heard chants praising Hamas, calls for the eradication of Jews, and discrimination against Jewish students. And that's not really the right cause. It's like fighting injustice with more injustice. Let's hope the students realize this, because their voice carries a lot of weight. They have influenced government policy on very important issues. So it's important to rally for a just cause and within the limits of the law. Our next story is from Asia. Southern Asia is facing a heat wave right now. Temperatures are spiking from India to the Philippines. The mercury crossed 48.2 degrees Celsius in Myanmar, 44 degrees in Thailand. It's over 40 degrees Celsius in parts of Vietnam and the Philippines. A red alert has been issued for eastern India for the states of West Bengal, Odisha and Bihar. High temperatures are expected over the next 4 days at least. Neighbouring Bangladesh is already facing its longest heat wave in 76 years, and it could get worse in the weeks to come. The month of May could bring even higher temperatures. The heat takes a toll on everyone, but students preparing for their end-of-year exams are especially vulnerable. Here's our report.
A heat wave has taken hold of southern Asia. Both South and Southeast Asia are reeling under the sun. People across the region, from India to the Philippines, are facing brutal temperatures. And it is taking a toll.
It's hot here, so customers are not coming. It's 40 degrees in Kolkata. I've not seen this much heat here. We're facing a lot of trouble. Customers are not coming and the business is affected. It's so hot that the customers are not coming.
I've never experienced such heat in my life. Yes, summer should be hot, but we used to get gusts of wind and rain. It is not happening this time. People are suffering a lot.
It's hotter than before and some riders are taking a break from work because of the heat. So we have more work to do during these days.
Today, Myanmar saw its highest April temperature in 56 years, since records began. The central town of Chok saw the mercury hit 48.2 degrees Celsius. It was 44 degrees Celsius in some parts of Thailand yesterday. 30 people have died in the heat in Thailand this year, compared to 37 in all of 2023. Last year was one of the hottest on record. 2024 may surpass that. A major cause is the El Niño. It's a natural weather phenomenon. It occurs in the Pacific Ocean. Every few years, the Pacific Ocean heats up. Water from the ocean surface evaporates, and it leads to heat waves or excess rainfall in various parts of the world. This takes place every few years, every 2 to 7 years on average, but lately it's been getting worse because of human-induced climate change. Our greenhouse gas emissions have led to global warming, and this has supercharged the El Niño phenomenon, leading to the brutal heat waves we're seeing. And it's only going to get worse in the years to come. These heat waves will take a toll on everyone, but especially children.
LTU and the DEP had also declared no face-to-face classes because it's so hard for especially in the elementary, the pupils to cope up with this kind of weather.
That was a school principal from the Philippines. The country has shut its public schools because of the excessive heat, for today and tomorrow. Bangladesh shut its schools as well. Dhaka was unsure about this at first. Yesterday it had decreed that schools would be open. Exam season is approaching. Students need to complete their studies. So, schools were supposed to be on today. But that decision was overturned. Temperatures hit 43 degrees Celsius in Dhaka today. It prompted a rethink. So now, Bangladesh has shut schools till Thursday. That is when it's expected to get cooler. But this illustrates the long-term problem. If we begin to face brutal conditions every summer, how does it make sense to hold exams during this period? The summer months are some of the most important in the academic year. School and college students have to give their exams in April and May, the hottest months in South and Southeast Asia. A new report says that the heat puts 243 million children at risk across East Asia and the Pacific, and the most dangerous months coincide with exams. If the system isn't changed, students will suffer every year. We need to adapt to the new climate realities. We need to rethink our academic calendars before the next generation suffers irreversible harm.
Our next story is from Africa, from the continent's most populous country, Nigeria. Nigeria's President Bola Tinubu is in Saudi Arabia right now, in the capital Riyadh. The city is hosting a special meeting of the World Economic Forum. It's the same group that gathers in Switzerland every year in the alpine town of Davos. The who's who of business leaders fly there every year. Well, this time all those tycoons are in Saudi Arabia. The WEF, World Economic Forum, is hosting a special session in Riyadh as we speak, and President Tinubu decided to go as well. He's been keeping busy there, holding meetings on the sidelines. Yesterday, he had a meeting with Robert Maersk Uggla. The middle name may sound familiar to you because it's the name of a global shipping giant, the Danish company Maersk. Robert Maersk Uggla is a great-grandson of the company's founder, and he's the current chairperson of the board at Maersk. So Nigeria's president had a meeting with Maersk's chair, and Tinubu walked away with a massive investment. Maersk is going to invest $600 million in Nigeria. Tinubu's office announced this with great fanfare. It uploaded these pictures and also put out this press release. It says Maersk will focus on expanding port infrastructure. They want to accommodate bigger ships. President Tinubu also spoke along the same lines. This is what he said, and I'm quoting. We need to encourage more opportunities for revenue expansion and minimize transshipments from larger ships to smaller ships. What does that mean? It means Nigeria's biggest port may be getting bigger. The Lagos port will be expanded, and Maersk will help do that. They already have multiple operations in Nigeria. They run terminals at 2 ports, one in the east and another in the west. Maersk runs them through its subsidiary APM Terminals. The one in Lagos is already Nigeria's largest container terminal, and Maersk wants to expand operations there. How do you do that? Let me quote from the company's chair. Historically, most of the West African coasts are already served by smaller ships. Currently, we see an opportunity to deploy larger ships in Nigeria. To achieve this, we need to expand the port infrastructure, especially in Lagos, where we need a bigger hub for logistics services. So they want to make Lagos port deeper. And for that, ocean-faring ships can dock there directly. Now, this eliminates the need to move shipments from the big ships to smaller ones, which will save time and money. It's a simple plan, but it will be a challenge to execute. Ports need to be maintained constantly. They need to be dredged, which means silt and soil need to be removed from the bottom of the port so it stays deep enough for the ships. Nigeria has spent millions maintaining the Lagos port complex, about $200 million over the last 10 years. So if Maersk deepens this port, maintenance expenses will also increase. But the company is betting big on Nigeria. Yesterday's $600 million investment is just the latest injection. Maersk has already put $2 billion into Nigeria over the years. It has worked to expand the country's logistics network, and it may spend more in the years ahead because of Nigeria's growth prospects. Lagos is the most populous city in all of Africa. It is home to about 21 million people. Nigeria is the most populous country with almost 220 million people. That is a massive market for goods, which means it will always need shipping services, which is why Maersk is pouring billions into Nigeria. It knows that the future lies in Africa's most populous nation. Have you heard of vampire facial? You don't need to be a Twilight fan to know about it. Vampire facial is a cosmetic procedure. It blew up about a decade ago, and over the years it has been loved by celebrities and athletes. This procedure involves drawing a client's own blood, separating its components, and then injecting plasma into the person's face using tiny needles. It promises to rejuvenate skin, But in the US, it has exposed 3 women to an HIV infection, the human immunodeficiency virus, HIV, which attacks the body's immune system. If left untreated, HIV can lead to AIDS. This is the first time someone has contracted this virus through a cosmetic procedure. So how did it happen? Are vampire facials dangerous? Here's a report.
Imagine going for a cosmetic procedure, hoping for younger looking, healthier skin, but coming back with an incurable disease like HIV. It's unheard of, right? But in a world of firsts, people have contracted the HIV virus through a cosmetic procedure. And we'll discuss how. But first, let's start with the basics. What is HIV? It stands for Human Immunodeficiency Virus. It's an infection that attacks the body's immune system, and it makes it easier to get sick with diseases like tuberculosis and cancer. HIV does not have a cure. In its most advanced stage, it can lead to AIDS. That's the acquired immunodeficiency syndrome. HIV can be deadly. In 2022, 630,000 people died from the infection globally. And now, 3 women in the US state of New Mexico have contracted HIV. The culprit? Vampire facials. Yes, the same vampire facial of blood red Kardashian fame. The vampire facial is a cosmetic procedure. Its actual name is platelet-rich plasma microneedling procedure. It involves drawing a client's own blood, separating its components, then using tiny needles to inject plasma into the face. It may sound absurd, but over the past decade, many people have undergone the procedure, especially across Europe and America. It first gained popularity in 2013 when influencer Kim Kardashian got the facial and posted about it. Her blood-covered face went viral. And now, the vampire facial is beloved by celebrities and athletes. The theory is that it helps reinvigorate the skin and reduces signs of aging, acne scarring, and sun damage. Many people in the beauty industry swear by the treatment. It's all the rage. So what went wrong in New Mexico? 3 women underwent the procedure in an unlicensed medical spa. Investigations into the matter showed that the facility was reusing disposable equipment which was intended for one-time use. And HIV transmission from contaminated needles is a well-known risk. What's more, inspection of the spa found unlabeled tubes of blood. Some were lying on kitchen counters, others were stored alongside food. So this was a major sanitation issue. Now 3 women are paying a lifelong price. The big question is, are vampire facials safe? If you believe clinics across the US, there are no risks with the treatment. And if you believe influencers, this is the only procedure you need for healthy skin. But do studies support this argument? Well, not really. This treatment has not proven to be effective. In fact, the Food and Drug Administration, that's the US government regulator, has still not approved the treatment for cosmetic use. It doesn't come under standard regulation, which means salons can offer the treatment without a qualified medical professional present, without the right checks and balances. So if you're planning to get a vampire facial, err on the side of caution.
If we were to draw a timeline of modern dating, it would be divided into 2 eras, the pre-swipe and the post-swipe. In all likelihood, you know why. Dating apps took off in the early 2010s. They unleashed a completely new way to easily access love and became a ubiquitous part of dating. Today, there are thousands of dating apps and people are spoiled for choice. Believe it or not, there are niche apps for dog lovers, cat lovers, salad fans, even clowns. It's kind of like having a personalized Cupid. But are these digital Cupids now falling from glory? More than a decade on, the novelty of swiping seems to have worn off. Now the lovesick are getting sick of it. Bumble and Match Group make up nearly the entire industry market share. You may not have heard of Match Group, but this is the company that owns Tinder. Since 2021, the two have lost more than $40 billion in market value. Bumble's share price has dropped 70% since 2021. Match Group has fallen 83%. Last year, they announced layoffs. This year, Bumble followed suit. And these are the industry behemoths, so you can imagine how the others are faring. They're all in the same boat. Like the Hello Group. This is a Chinese company that owns the popular dating site Tantan. Since 2021, its share price has dropped 64%, so dating apps are bleeding money. And why is that? Because users are increasingly ghosting them. Let's again look at the world's most popular dating app, Tinder. 46% of online daters have used Tinder globally. But now many are wondering if Tinder is dead because its downloads are falling dramatically. According to the most recent data, annual downloads are down more than a third from the app's peak in 2014. And this is not good news for Tinder, but it is a great marker of the overall trend. For instance, in 2023, the US saw 36 million dating app downloads, which sounds like a big number, but it's down 2% from 2022 and 16% down from 2020. Now let's look at India. Between 2022 and 2023, several dating apps saw a drop in users, and each of these 5 apps saw a fall of 20 to 55%. And these apps are huge in India. But they too are finding it difficult to keep up. So what's behind this shift? Why is the world falling out of love with dating apps? There are 3 main reasons. For starters, the lack of adaptation. These apps presented the world with something new. Love through a smartphone, with something as simple as a swipe. But that was a decade ago. There has been no major innovation since. So people are losing interest, especially the young. Dating apps are failing to attract Gen Z users or those born between the late 1990s and early 2010s. According to surveys, more than 90% of them feel frustrated with these apps. Also, dating apps are an ocean of spam, bots, fake accounts, even AI-generated images. Plus, there are privacy risks. Apps may be more keen to know about your personal information than potential love interests. According to a recent report, 20 of the world's most popular apps do not have proper privacy controls. They may share or sell your personal information for advertising. And beyond the boredom and dangers, dating apps promise to find love, which is as elusive as it is complex. So the lack of matches on apps can trigger insecurities, while too many matches can be overwhelming. Either way, there is no winning, it seems. So what should be a fun experience is now causing burnout. And like with any toxic relationship, there is resentment, in this case towards the apps. This year, a class action lawsuit was filed in the US. It accused the Match Group of being predatory and keeping users hooked, which is why many users are breaking up with their apps, going back to the old school ways of finding love. And much like tormented exes, the apps are planning a glow up. Some are trying to use artificial intelligence, claiming to match couples based on brain activity or facial expressions even. Only time will tell if digital love will find a way or if dating apps will remain lovelorn. And now it's time for Vantage Shots, images that tell the story. Thousands protest in Georgia over a controversial foreign agent bill. Floods kill people and damage homes after a dam bursts in Kenya. And Moscow sets up an exhibition of captured Western military equipment from Ukraine. Finally, taking you back in history, on this day in 1991, a tropical cyclone struck Bangladesh, killing over 140,000 people. It was one of the deadliest tropical cyclones in history. Over 10 million people lost their homes. It caused damages worth $1.7 billion. We're leaving you on that note. Thanks for watching. We'll see you tomorrow.
The United States and China, two of the world's top economies, are in a trade war. It didn't start in a day. The conflict has been years in the making. Both countries have hiked taxes on goods being imported from the other country. They've even blocked each other's products from entering their markets. This war of tariffs and restrictions has been ongoing on multiple fronts, from soybeans to satellite parts to high-tech products like chips. And last week, a new front opened in this trade war. This time, it was for the very backbone of the industrial economy: steel. US President Joe Biden has called for tripling tariffs on steel imported from China. Speaking in Pennsylvania, one of the US's top steel-producing states, Biden said that his administration has started an investigation against Chinese steel. He further added that import taxes on Chinese steel will be raised if they were found hurting US industries.
I promise you, and I'm not going to let that happen again. Look, right now, my U.S. Trade Representative is investigating trade practices by the Chinese government regarding steel and aluminum. If that investigation confirms these anti-competitive trade practices, then I'm calling on her to consider tripling the tariff rates for both steel imports and aluminum imports from China.
China was quick to condemn Biden's remarks. Beijing accused Washington of hypocrisy. But how did steel suddenly become a focal point for the US-China trade tensions? Let's understand. China is the world's largest steel manufacturer. The country has been producing over 1 billion tons of steel every year since 2019. In just the first quarter of 2024, China exported nearly 26 million tons of the metal. This is more than 28% of the steel it exported in the same period in 2023. And for the full year, Chinese steel companies exported a whopping 90 million tons of steel. On the flip side, the country's imports stood at 7.64 million tons. This high rate of steel exports was due to two major reasons. First, weak domestic demand. China has been going through an economic downturn for the last few years. Because of this, the demand of steel in industry has declined. And this, in turn, has pushed producers to sell their surplus products abroad. The second reason is the low price of Chinese steel.
But for too long, the Chinese government has poured state money into Chinese steel companies, pushing them to make so much steel as much as possible, subsidized by the Chinese government. Because Chinese steel companies produce a lot more steel than China needs, it ends up dumping extra steel into the global markets at a fairly low price.